Hello, and welcome to another video where we explore the history and myths of the world. Take a seat, lean back, and enjoy the video. Imagine standing in a quiet village somewhere in Asia nearly 800 years ago. The morning begins like any other. Children play outside. Merchants prepare their goods. Farmers tend their fields. Then, something changes. A faint vibration ripples beneath the earth. At first, no one pays it much attention. But within moments, the trembling grows stronger. Dust begins to rise on the horizon, and then they see them. Thousands of horsemen racing across the open land. They move with astonishing speed, disciplined, relentless, silent except for the thunder of their horses. For countless towns and kingdoms, this was the last thing they would ever see. Those riders came from a land with no towering castles, no massive cities, no grand monuments. They came from the windswept plains of Mongolia. Yet within a single lifetime, they would build the largest contiguous land empire in human history, stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe. Their leader became a legend almost impossible to separate from myth. To some, he was a brilliant military strategist. To others, he was history's greatest destroyer. His name was Genghis Khan. But history did not begin with an emperor. It began with a boy, long before armies marched beneath his banners, before kings feared his arrival, before entire civilizations recorded his name in terror. He was known simply as Temujin, a child born into uncertainty, a child who would experience hunger, betrayal, and loss long before he ever experienced victory. His journey wasn't shaped inside royal palaces or elite academies. It was forged on one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. To understand the man who conquered much of the known world, we first have to understand the world that shaped him. The Mongolian steppe stretches for thousands of miles across Central Asia. To an outsider, it appears calm. Rolling grasslands, open skies, an endless horizon. But appearances can be deceiving. Winter temperatures could plunge far below freezing, killing both people and livestock. Summer droughts left entire tribes searching desperately for fresh pasture. There were no permanent homes, no reliable harvests, no walls to hide behind. Everything depended on the health of your animals, the strength of your family, and the loyalty of your tribe. Here, survival wasn't guaranteed. It had to be earned every single day. And it was in this unforgiving world that the future Genghis Khan took his very first breath. Life on the Mongolian steppe was defined by one simple rule: strength ensured survival. There was no single king ruling these vast grasslands. Instead, dozens of tribes competed for land, horses, and influence. One season, two clans might fight side by side against a common enemy. The next, they could be raiding each other's camps before sunrise. Alliances were fragile. Trust was rare. A handshake could become a betrayal within days. For the people of the steppe, war wasn't an extraordinary event. It was simply another part of life. From the moment they could walk, children were prepared for the life ahead. By the age of 4 or 5, many were already learning to ride horses. Soon after came archery. Hours were spent practicing from horseback, firing arrows while galloping across uneven ground. The horse became more than transportation. It became an extension of the rider. This way of life produced warriors capable of covering extraordinary distances with remarkable speed. Long before Temujin ever commanded an army, he was growing up in a culture where survival depended on mastering both horse and bow. Sometime around the year 1162, a boy was born into the Borjigin clan. His father named him Temujin. According to Mongol tradition, the child entered the world clutching a blood clot in his tiny fist. To many, this was seen as an omen, a sign that the newborn was destined to become a great warrior. Whether the story is legend or fact, historians cannot say with certainty. But one thing is clear: no one present that day could have imagined the scale of the life that lay before him. Temujin's father was a tribal leader named Yasujii. He was respected among his people, but like every leader on the steppe, his authority depended on loyalty rather than absolute power. He negotiated alliances, led raids, protected his followers, and constantly watched for rivals eager to take his place. Leadership in the steppe was never secure. It had to be earned again and again. These were the lessons Temujin absorbed from an early age, even if he didn't yet understand their importance. As Temujin grew older, his future seemed promising. He was the son of a respected chief. His family held influence, and arrangements were already being made for his future. But on the Mongolian steppe, fortunes could change in a single day. The next chapter of Temujin's life would begin with a journey his father never returned from. When Temujin was around 9 years old, his father believed it was time to prepare him for adulthood. Among the Mongol tribes, marriages were often arranged years in advance. These unions weren't just about family. They were about building alliances, strengthening tribes, and securing the future. So Yasujii took his son on a journey to visit the family of a young girl named Borte. According to tradition, Temujin would stay with her family for a time before they eventually married. The arrangement was made. The future seemed secure. Satisfied with the agreement, Yasujii began the long ride home alone. He had no reason to believe it would be his final journey. On his journey home, Yasujii stopped to share a meal with a group of travelers. What he didn't know was that they belonged to the Tatars. Years earlier, Yasujii had fought against them. According to historical accounts, they recognized him almost immediately. Rather than attacking him openly, they chose a quieter form of revenge. They poisoned his food. At first, Yasujii continued his journey. But before long, the poison began to take its toll. Weak and gravely ill, he managed to return home. Within days, he was dead. For many societies, the death of a father is a family tragedy. On the Mongolian steppe, it could also become a political disaster. Yasujii's authority had held his followers together. Without him, that loyalty quickly began to disappear. Rival leaders saw opportunity. Former allies reconsidered their commitments. And Temujin, still just a child, was far too young to replace his father. Everything his family depended upon suddenly hung by a thread. Not long after Yasujii's death, the unthinkable happened. The families who had once followed him made a decision. They would leave. One after another, they packed their belongings. They gathered their horses. They dismantled their yurts. And they rode away. Temujin's mother, Holon, pleaded with them to stay. Without a leader, her family had little chance of surviving alone. But no one listened. By the end of the day, the camp had fallen silent. The family that had once belonged to a powerful tribe now stood alone on the endless steppe. Temujin had lost more than his father. He had lost the protection of an entire people. Abandoned by their tribe, Temujin's family faced a reality that few could endure. There were no warriors left to protect them, no large herds to sustain them, no allies to call upon. Every day became a struggle simply to stay alive. His mother, Holon, refused to let her children surrender to despair. She gathered wild berries, dug edible roots from the frozen earth, and taught her children how to catch fish in nearby rivers. When food was scarce, they hunted small animals. When winter arrived, they endured freezing nights with little more than determination to keep them going. Years later, Mongol tradition would remember Holon not only as the mother of Genghis Khan, but as the woman whose resilience kept the family alive when everything else had been taken from them. Hunger changes people. It forces impossible choices. As food became increasingly scarce, tensions within the family began to grow. Temujin's older half-brother, Bektar, had begun claiming a larger share of what little food they could find. Under normal circumstances, disputes like these might have been settled by elders. But there were no elders, no chief, no tribe, only a family struggling to survive. For Temujin, every meal meant the difference between life and death. And before long, resentment gave way to something far more dangerous. One day, Temujin and his younger brother, Kasar, followed Bektar as he walked away from camp. They carried their bows. The confrontation was brief. The decision they made would change Temujin forever. Together, the brothers killed Bektar. According to the secret history of the Mongols, the oldest surviving account of Genghis Khan's life, Bektar did not fight back. He accepted his fate telling his younger brothers not to destroy the family through further conflict. Whether every detail of that account is accurate remains uncertain, but historians generally agree on one point. Temujin killed his own half-brother while still a boy. It was an act born from desperation, hunger, and the brutal realities of life on the steppe. The years that followed hardened Temujin. He had survived hunger. He had survived abandonment. And now he carried the burden of taking a life. But an even greater challenge was approaching. A rival tribe known as the Tayikid had not forgotten who he was. To them, Temujin was more than an orphaned boy. He was the son of a former leader, a potential threat. Soon, they would capture him, place a heavy wooden cane around his neck, and leave him to live as a prisoner. Few believed he would ever escape. They were about to underestimate the boy who would one day become Genghis Khan. The wooden cane was designed to make escape nearly impossible. It was heavy, awkward, and meant to remind everyone who wore it that they had no freedom. Each day, Temujin was forced to serve the people who had destroyed his family. He watched them from the inside. He studied their habits, their weaknesses, their routines. This was a skill he would carry throughout his life. Temujin learned that survival was not only about strength. Sometimes survival depended on patience, on observation, and on knowing exactly when to act. Although Temujin was surrounded by enemies, not everyone treated him with cruelty. One young man named Sorkin Shira noticed something unusual about the prisoner. He saw that Temujin was not broken. Despite his situation, the boy still carried himself with confidence. According to Mongol historical tradition, Sorkin Shira and his family secretly helped Temujin escape punishment and eventually escape captivity. It was a small act of kindness in a brutal world, but it would become one of the first examples of something Temujin would later understand deeply. Loyalty could come from unexpected places. Escape was almost impossible. A prisoner wearing a wooden collar could not move quickly, could not hide easily, could not fight effectively. But Temujin waited for the right moment. When the camp became distracted, he made his move. He ran, not toward safety, but toward freedom. He hid from searching warriors, moved through darkness, and eventually reached the home of Sorkin Shira, who helped conceal him. After days of uncertainty, Temujin was finally free. But freedom came with a new realization. The world had taken everything from him. If he wanted to survive, he would need to build something stronger than what he had lost. After escaping the Tayikid, Temujin returned to the only place he had ever truly called home, the family camp. But he was no longer the same child who had left. The boy who had once been powerless had now experienced betrayal, slavery, and survival. These experiences changed him. He understood something that many leaders of the steppe failed to recognize. A person could not rely only on family connections or noble birth. Power came from people who chose to stand beside you. And Temujin would spend the rest of his life building those bonds. Temujin eventually returned to the family he had visited years earlier as a child, the family of Borte. The marriage agreement arranged by his father was honored. Borte became his wife. She was not simply a companion. She became one of the most important people in his life. Intelligent, strong-willed, and politically valuable, Borte would support Temujin through some of the darkest moments of his rise. Their relationship would be tested many times. But at this stage, their marriage represented something Temujin desperately needed. A new beginning. On the steppe, a person alone had almost no chance of survival. A warrior needed allies. A family needed protection. A leader needed followers. Temujin understood this better than most. He had seen how quickly people abandoned his family after his father's death. He had learned that loyalty, based only on status, could disappear overnight. So he began creating relationships based on something different: trust, respect, and shared success. One of the first important alliances he formed was with a childhood companion named Jamuka. Jamuka and Temujin became sworn brothers, known as Anda. This bond was considered stronger than ordinary friendship. It was a promise of loyalty that carried deep meaning among Mongol warriors. For a time, the two men seemed destined to rise together. They shared enemies, they shared ambitions, and they shared a vision of a stronger future. But there was one problem. Both men were natural leaders. Both attracted followers. And both believed they understood what the Mongol tribes needed. Their friendship would eventually become one of the greatest rivalries in Mongol history. But for now, Temujin was still gathering strength. His greatest challenge was not conquering foreign lands. It was uniting his own people. For a short time, Temujin's life appeared to be moving toward stability. He had a wife, a growing family, and the beginnings of a network of allies. But on the Mongolian steppe, peace was never guaranteed. Old enemies remained nearby. Tribes competed constantly for influence, and a person's family could become a weapon used against them. Temujin was about to experience one of the most painful events of his early life, an event that would force him to stop being a survivor and become a leader. Not long after their marriage, a rival group attacked Temujin's camp. The attackers were the Merkit tribe. Years earlier, Temujin's father had taken his mother, Holon, from another clan. Now the Merkits wanted revenge. Their target was not Temujin himself. It was his wife. They captured Borte and carried her away. For Temujin, the attack was devastating. He had already lost his father, his tribe, his freedom. Now he had lost the person who represented his future. But unlike the boy who had once been abandoned, this time Temujin had something he did not have before: allies. A weaker man might have chased the attackers alone. Temujin understood that would be suicide. The Merkits had numbers. They had experienced warriors, and they had the advantage. So Temujin did something that showed his growing political intelligence. He asked for help. He reached out to powerful allies. Among them was his sworn brother, Jamuka. He also gained support from another important figure, Togrul, the leader of the Karite tribe. Together, they assembled a force strong enough to challenge the Merkits. For the first time, Temujin was not fighting only for survival. He was commanding others toward a shared goal. The combined army moved quickly. The attack against the Merkits was sudden and overwhelming. Temujin had learned the importance of speed from life on the steppe. Strike before the enemy is ready. Move before they can respond. The Merkits were defeated, and after months of uncertainty, Borte was finally returned. The rescue was more than a personal victory. It was the first major success of Temujin's career. People had seen him organize an alliance, lead warriors, and achieve a goal that once seemed impossible. The orphan son of a fallen chief was beginning to become something far more dangerous: a leader. The rescue of Borte changed how others viewed Temujin. Before this moment, many saw him as the son of a fallen chief, a survivor, a young warrior trying to rebuild what had been taken from him. But now, people saw something different. They saw someone who could bring people together, someone who could make decisions under pressure, someone who could succeed where others expected failure. Temujin understood that his victory was not only about defeating the Merkits. It was about proving a new idea. A leader's worth should not come only from birth. It should come from ability. Soon after Borte's return, she gave birth to a son. The child was named Joki, but his birth came with uncertainty. Because Borte had spent time as a captive among the Merkits, some questioned whether Joki was truly Temujin's son. These doubts would follow Joki for much of his life. But Temujin made a decision. He accepted Joki as his own. This moment revealed something important about Temujin. Despite the harsh world that shaped him, he understood the power of loyalty. Family was not only about blood, it was also about choice. As Temujin gained followers, he began doing something unusual. Most Mongol leaders rewarded only those from powerful families. The sons of nobles received the highest positions. Common warriors remained at the bottom. Temujin saw things differently. He valued loyalty and skill above traditional status. A talented warrior from a poor family could rise. A noble who betrayed him could lose everything. This idea would become one of the foundations of the empire he would later build. People followed Temujin because they believed there was a chance to rise with him. But Temujin's growing influence created tension, especially with the person who had once been his closest friend, Jamuka. The two men had been sworn brothers. They had fought together. They had rescued Borte together. But they began to see the future of the Mongol people differently. Jamukha believed tradition and noble birth should remain at the center of power. Temujin believed loyalty and ability mattered more. At first, the disagreement was only political, but on the steppe, political disagreements often became personal conflicts. The friendship between two young warriors was beginning to fracture, and soon, the Mongol tribes would be forced to choose: follow Jamukha or follow Temujin. By the late 1100s, the Mongol steppe had become divided between competing visions. One belonged to Jamukha. He represented the old ways, a world where noble families held power, where status was inherited, where traditions determined a person's place. The other belonged to Temujin. He wanted something different, a society where loyalty mattered more than family name, where talent could rise from anywhere, where followers were rewarded based on what they could achieve. The disagreement between the two former brothers was no longer just personal. It represented a choice about the future of the Mongol people. Eventually, the difference between them became impossible to ignore. Temujin and Jamukha separated. Many of Temujin's followers chose to stay with him. This was a critical moment. On the steppe, a leader was only as powerful as the people willing to follow him. Every warrior who chose Temujin strengthened his position. Every departure weakened his rivals. The young survivor, who had once been abandoned by everyone, was now becoming someone people willingly followed. The rivalry eventually turned into open conflict. Jamukha gathered a powerful army and challenged Temujin. The battle that followed showed the difference between the two leaders. Jamukha relied heavily on traditional aristocratic power. Temujin relied on organization, discipline, and loyalty. Although Temujin did not win every battle immediately, each conflict taught him valuable lessons. He studied his enemies, adapted his strategies, and continued building a force unlike anything the steppe had seen before. Victory on the steppe came with a price. Temujin was ruthless toward those who refused to submit. He understood that divided tribes created endless cycles of revenge. His solution was brutal: break the old tribal system. Replace competing loyalties with loyalty to a single leader. Many opponents were defeated. Some were absorbed into his growing army. Others disappeared from history. Slowly, the tribes that had spent generations fighting each other began moving toward a single banner. The Mongols were changing, and so was Temujin. By the beginning of the 13th century, Temujin had defeated many of his greatest rivals. But the Mongol steppe was not yet united. Powerful tribes still resisted him: the Kharite, the Nayman, and other groups who believed they could stop his rise. For generations, these tribes had fought each other for control of the grasslands. Now they faced a different kind of enemy, a leader who did not simply want victory. He wanted to completely transform the way the Mongol world worked. The traditional Mongol order was built on family connections, ancient rivalries, and inherited privilege. Temujin believed these systems were the reason the tribes remained weak, so he began replacing them. He promoted people based on loyalty and ability. A skilled warrior could rise regardless of birth. A powerful noble could fall if he betrayed him. This created something new: an army where every person had a reason to fight for their leader, not because of tradition, but because their future was tied to his success. In the year 1206, the Mongol tribes gathered for a great assembly known as a Kurultai. This was a moment that would change history. Before them stood Temujin, no longer a minor tribal leader. He had defeated his enemies, built a powerful army. At this gathering, he was given a new title: Genghis Khan. The meaning of the title remains debated by historians, but its significance was clear. A new ruler had emerged, and the world was about to discover what his united Mongol nation was capable of. By 1206, Genghis Khan had accomplished what generations of Mongol leaders had failed to do. He had united the tribes, but unity was not the end of his ambition. It was the beginning. The Mongols had spent centuries fighting among themselves. Now they had a single army, a single command structure, and a leader who understood that their greatest strength could not remain unused. Beyond the grasslands were wealthy kingdoms, ancient civilizations, and powerful empires. The world outside Mongolia was about to meet the force that had been forged on the steppe. Genghis Khan's first major campaigns were against neighboring kingdoms. One of his earliest targets was the Western Xia Kingdom, located along the northeastern edge of the Tibetan Plateau. The Western Xia controlled important trade routes and had resisted Mongol influence. In 1209, Genghis Khan launched an invasion. The Mongols were not only skilled fighters, they were fast learners. They adapted to every enemy they faced. Against fortified cities, they studied siege techniques. Against larger armies, they used speed and mobility. The Western Xia campaign revealed a pattern that would define Mongol warfare. Adapt, learn, overcome. After defeating Western Xia, Genghis Khan turned his attention toward an even greater opponent, the Jin dynasty of northern China. The Jin ruled over millions of people. They controlled wealthy cities. They possessed advanced technology, and they believed that nomadic warriors from the north could never defeat them. This belief would prove costly. The Mongols were outnumbered. They lacked the cities and resources of their enemies, but they possessed advantages that many settled kingdoms underestimated: mobility, discipline, and a commander who was willing to change the rules of war. The early victories against Western Xia and Jin proved something important. The Mongols were no longer simply defending their homeland. They were becoming a conquering power, but their greatest challenge was still ahead. Far to the west lay a wealthy empire that controlled one of the most important trade networks on Earth, the Khwarezmian Empire, a kingdom of powerful cities, enormous wealth, and a ruler who would make a decision that changed history. A single act of arrogance would soon bring the full force of the Mongol Empire crashing down upon him. At first, Genghis Khan did not seek war. He wanted trade. The Mongol Empire depended on commerce, and the Silk Road offered enormous opportunities. So he sent a caravan carrying valuable goods to Khwarezm. It was meant to be a peaceful mission, a chance to establish diplomatic and economic relations. But when the caravan reached the city of Otrar, something went terribly wrong. The governor of the city accused the merchants of being spies. He seized their goods, and he ordered many of them killed. It was a decision that would have consequences far beyond anyone in Otrar could have imagined. Genghis Khan did not immediately attack. Instead, he attempted diplomacy one more time. He sent representatives to the Khwarezmian ruler, Shah Muhammad II. The message was clear: punish those responsible, restore the relationship, avoid unnecessary war. But the Shah made another mistake. The Mongol envoys were insulted. One was killed. The others were humiliated and sent back. To Genghis Khan, this was not just an attack on merchants. It was an attack on his authority. The response would be unlike anything Central Asia had ever seen. In 1219, Genghis Khan began one of the most ambitious campaigns of his life. The Mongol army moved west. Thousands of horsemen crossed deserts and mountains. They carried supplies. They carried weapons. And they carried a reputation that was spreading faster than their armies. Cities that heard the Mongols were coming faced a terrifying choice: surrender or resist. Those who surrendered could be spared. Those who fought would face the full power of the Mongol war machine. The Khwarezmian Empire was about to learn what happened when the Mongols went to war. The Khwarezmian Empire expected a traditional invasion, a large army approaching from one direction, a clear battlefield, a single enemy to defeat. But Genghis Khan fought differently. Instead of moving as one massive force, he divided his army. Different groups approached from different directions. Some crossed harsh deserts that many believed impossible to cross. Others moved through unfamiliar territory with incredible speed. The Khwarezmian defenders were forced to fight an enemy they could not predict. The Mongols were not simply attacking cities. They were surrounding an entire empire. One of the first major cities to fall was Bokhara, a center of learning, religion, and trade. Bokhara had stood for centuries. Its people believed its walls would protect them, but the Mongols had developed powerful siege methods. They used engineers from conquered lands. They adapted enemy technology, and they combined their traditional mobility with new techniques of warfare. When the city finally fell, Genghis Khan entered Bokhara. According to historical accounts, he gathered the city's people and delivered a message that revealed his view of power. The walls had not saved them. Their own confidence had. After Bokhara came Samarkand, one of the greatest cities of the medieval world. Its markets connected east and west. Its buildings represented centuries of civilization. The city had a powerful defense, thousands of soldiers, strong walls, and confidence that it could resist. But the Mongols combined military pressure with psychological warfare. They created the impression that resistance was hopeless. Some defenders surrendered. Others attempted to fight. In the end, Samarkand fell. The victory destroyed the heart of Khwarezmian power. The Mongol conquests were often accompanied by extreme violence. Cities that resisted could face devastating consequences. This brutality served a strategic purpose. Fear traveled faster than armies. When neighboring cities heard what happened to those who fought back, many surrendered without a battle. This saved Mongol soldiers time and resources. But it also created one of the darkest parts of Genghis Khan's legacy. He was a brilliant organizer and military commander. He was also responsible for campaigns that caused enormous destruction and loss of life. Both realities are part of his history. After the destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire, Genghis Khan had achieved what few leaders in history ever had. His armies had crossed enormous distances. They had defeated powerful kingdoms. They had transformed a small steppe nation into a continental empire. But conquest was never simple. Every new territory created new challenges. The Mongols had to govern people with different languages, religions, and traditions. Genghis Khan understood that destroying kingdoms was only the first step. Holding them together would require something else: organization. Despite his age, Genghis Khan was not finished fighting. In the early 1220s, he turned his attention back toward the east. The Western Xia Kingdom, which had previously submitted to Mongol power, challenged Mongol authority. Genghis Khan decided to personally lead another campaign. This would become his final war. By this point, he was no longer the young warrior who had struggled for survival in the steppe. He was an aging emperor who had spent decades fighting. Yet his ambition remained unchanged. In 1227, during the campaign against Western Xia, Genghis Khan died. The exact cause remains unknown. Historical sources offer different possibilities. Some accounts suggest he was injured after falling from his horse. Others mention illness. Later legends added more dramatic stories. But the truth is that no one knows exactly how the world's most famous conqueror met his end. What is known is that he died while still leading the empire he had created. And immediately, a question emerged. What would happen to everything he had built? According to tradition, Genghis Khan's burial place was kept secret. His followers returned his body to Mongolia. The location of his tomb has never been confirmed. Legends claim that those involved in the burial protected the secret at any cost. Whether those stories are true or exaggerated, one thing remains certain. The man who spent his life creating the greatest empire of his age disappeared almost as mysteriously as he had risen. But his story was not over, because the empire he left behind would become even larger after his death. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, many expected his empire to collapse. After all, it had been built around one extraordinary leader. But that prediction was wrong. The system he created was strong enough to survive without him. His sons and grandsons continued expanding Mongol power. Within decades, the Mongol Empire became the largest contiguous land empire the world had ever seen. From China to Eastern Europe, from the mountains of Central Asia to the Middle East, the Mongol influence stretched across continents. The legacy of Genghis Khan is complicated. His name is associated with destruction on an enormous scale. Millions died during the Mongol conquests. Entire cities disappeared. Civilizations were forever changed. But his empire also created connections across a massive region. Under Mongol rule, trade routes became safer in many areas. Merchants, scholars, and technologies traveled farther than before. Ideas moved between cultures that had previously been separated by distance. The same empire that brought destruction also created a new level of global connection. So who was Genghis Khan? A hero? A villain? A genius? A destroyer? The answer depends on where you look. To his enemies, he was a terrifying force that brought death and destruction. To many Mongols, he was the founder of their nation. To historians, he remains one of the most influential figures who ever lived. But beyond the legends and the battles was a human story. A boy who lost everything. A prisoner who escaped. A leader who united people who had spent generations fighting each other. A man who transformed himself and then transformed the world. 8 centuries later, the name Genghis Khan still echoes. His empire has disappeared. His battles have become history. But the consequences of his actions remain. Borders changed. Cultures connected. The course of world history was permanently altered. The boy who once stood alone on the frozen steppe could never have imagined what his life would become. He began with nothing, and he left behind an empire that reshaped the world. This was the story of Temujin, the man who became Genghis Khan. Thank you for watching the video. Enjoy the rest of your day.